Imagine for a second that you're on an island, and the most powerful, most terrifying empire on the planet, a force that has steamrolled entire civilizations, has just set its sights on your home. Well, this isn't some fantasy story. It's the absolutely incredible, true story of how 13th century Japan stared down the full might of the Mongol Empire and somehow survived.
So the big question is, how? How in the world did a divine wind literally save an entire nation from what looked like certain doom?
Well, it all comes down to one powerful Japanese word, kamikaze. Now, I know what you're thinking, World War II, right? But its origins go way, way back. It literally translates to divine wind, and it got its name from two massive typhoons that showed up at the most critical moments imaginable.
Okay, so to really get what a big deal this was, we first have to understand the sheer scale of the force Japan was up against. We're talking about the age of the Khan's ambition, an empire that seemed to stretch on forever.
Just look at this map. It really tells the story, doesn't it? In the 13th century, Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty was just immense. It had swallowed up all of China, it had subjugated Korea, turning it into a vassal state, which basically means Korea had to do whatever the Mongols said. And from that position of unbelievable power, Japan looked like the next piece of the puzzle.
But the Khan's ambition was about to run smack into a brick wall. Because Japan wasn't just any island. It was a nation of warriors, isolated and fiercely independent. And the matchup was just stark. On one side, you've got Kublai Khan's gigantic, multi-ethnic army, drawn from a continent-spanning empire. And on the other, you have the Kamakura shogunate, Japan's military government, ruling over a small chain of islands, defended by samurai clans. The guys really calling the shots were the Hojo regents, who ruled in the emperor's name. It was a classic David versus Goliath story.
And here's a key difference. The Mongol Empire was this one, big, unified machine. Japan, not so much. It wasn't ruled by a single, all-powerful emperor. Power was spread out among all these competing samurai clans, all technically under the shogunate. And that decentralized nature, well, it would turn out to be both a strength and a weakness.
So before the fighting started, came the threats. Kublai Khan liked to use diplomacy first, and he sent Japan a series of letters that were basically an offer they couldn't refuse, or so he thought.
You can just feel the tension ramping up here year after year. From 1266 to 1273, 6 different missions came to Japan demanding they submit. The first time, Japan just ignored it. The second, they sent the letter back, a flat-out rejection. By the 4th mission, the Mongol envoys were being met by armed samurai. After 6 tries, that was it. The time for talking was over. And get this, the tone of these letters was just chilling. This is a quote from the very first one. "The sages consider the entire universe one family. Who would care to appeal to arms?" It's phrased like this friendly invitation to join the family, but the threat is bubbling just under the surface. It's like saying, we're all friends here. It would be a real shame if someone had to get hurt.
So yeah, diplomacy failed. And what happens when diplomacy fails against the Mongols? The first wave. The invasion of 1274 was on. And the numbers here, they are just brutal. The Yuan dynasty shows up with something like 23,000 soldiers on 900 ships. And waiting for them, maybe 6,000 local samurai, at the absolute most. They were outnumbered at least 4 to 1. Just think about those odds for a sec.
And it wasn't just about the sheer number of soldiers. No. The Mongols came with a nasty surprise. Explosive, hand-thrown bombs. This was gunpowder technology, something totally terrifying and new to the Japanese samurai.
And all of this, the numbers, the bombs, the unstoppable empire, it had a very real, very human effect. The man in charge of Japan's entire defense, the regent, Hojo Tokimune, was reportedly just paralyzed by fear. And honestly, can you blame him? But this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. Tokimune goes to a Zen master for guidance. And the master doesn't give him military advice. He gives him spiritual advice. He says, sit in meditation to find the source of your cowardice in yourself. What an incredible moment of calm in the middle of total chaos.
And you know what? Legend says it worked. After meditating and confronting his own fear, Tokimune let out a powerful roar. Katsu! It's a Zen shout, meant to be like a lion's roar, a symbol that he had found his courage and was ready to lead his people no matter what.
So that first invasion, it actually fizzled out. Thanks to some fierce samurai fighting and a sudden storm that damaged the fleet, the Mongols pulled back. But they were not done, not by a long shot. They spent the next 7 years plotting their revenge, and in 1281, they came back with a second, even bigger invasion, setting the stage for the real divine wind.
140,000. That's how big the second Mongol invasion force was. It was one of the largest naval invasions in human history up to that point. For Japan, the situation wasn't just desperate, it was basically hopeless.
And then, the impossible happened. A massive, catastrophic typhoon, the divine wind, slammed right into the Mongol fleet. And this thing didn't just pass by, it raged for 2 solid days. To make everything worse, many of the Mongol ships were flat-bottomed riverboats, built in a hurry. They were absolutely the wrong tool for the job, completely unprepared for the open ocean, let alone a killer storm.
The result was, well, you can see it right here. It was a complete and utter catastrophe for the Mongols. Out of 140,000 soldiers, it's estimated that over 120,000 of them were lost. The storm just wiped the fleet off the map. It was a victory won not by swords, but by the wind and the waves.
This unbelievable, miraculous victory would echo through the centuries. It left a legacy that would go on to define the entire nation of Japan.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, first, this event drew a line in the sand. It was the final limit of Mongol expansion. It also became a core part of Japan's identity. This idea that their islands were special, divinely protected. It cemented the power of the samurai class that had led the defense. And of course, it created the legend of the kamikaze. But here's the ironic twist. Paying for the defense pretty much bankrupted the shogunate, and that financial strain helped lead to its collapse decades later.
And that brings us full circle, because this ancient 13th century legend of a divine wind saving the homeland was revived in a famous and tragic way during World War II, giving its name to the pilots sent on a mission to protect Japan from another invading fleet.
Which leaves us with one final, massive question to chew on. It's one of those moments where you realize all of history can pivot on something as random as the weather. If not for that storm, how might the history of Japan, and maybe even the world, be completely different today?